Yeah, the person I was going to ask about, unfortunately, he passed away not too long ago, who you definitely saw regularly back then. Jimmy Rave. Could you talk a little bit about Jimmy Rave? Because I know him and Sal at one point were, the best of friends, and Sal talked
Yeah,
about him extensively.
yeah. Jimmy Rave, man, he when Jimmy Rave came to NWA Wildside, I was the cruiserweight champion or the lightweight champion or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And he came, he was like I said, he was a kid. I think he might have been 17, 18 years old, ridiculously skinny, or whatever. And it was like, okay, Caprice, you're gonna be wrestling this guy. And I was like, okay, whatever. Um, and then there was like a lot. Like Bill fell in love with him. Like Bill Behrens was already in love with Jimmy Rave before Jimmy Rave even started wrestling at NWA Wildside. I guess he saw him at some other show,
Mm-hmm.
and he just knew that he was a star. And so I was just kind of like, who's this kid? And I probably had an ego at the time because I'm like, I'm a champion, and I'm getting in shape, and for me, it's always been the Caprice Coleman, you're good, but you're small. Caprice Coleman, you're good, but you're light. Caprice Coleman, you're good, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It was always these things where then there's this guy that comes in and he's like, 50 pounds lighter than you and doesn't do this and doesn't do that. And you're like, oh, this is what am I, what I mean? What am I working for? Whatever like that. But working with him, Sal Renaro, like I said, was the guy that had these ideas that makes himself the butt of the joke. But Jimmy Rave was the guy that had ideas that you would never think of in pro wrestling that was so simple. Like he had a mind for wrestling that I think if he was if he was if he was alive today and people knew who he would be one of the greatest producers in pro wrestling right
Mm-hmm.
now, without a doubt, because he knew how to work a crowd, he knew how to draw heat, he knew how to draw sympathy. Whatever role Jimmy Rave was, whether he was the heel or the baby, he knew that role, and like he would sell like no other. He could draw sympathy like no other, and he could draw heat like he's the only wrestler I know that whatever role he was playing, you believed it, and like you cheered for him or you booed him. It was no in between.
Mm-hmm.
And like even you can go to Ring of Honor, and when he was the crown jewel, people would
The
threw
toilet paper.
toilet paper and like you know what I'm saying? Like they hated him, and it was because oh you can't do this, but he's like you can't wrestle, you can't do this, and he was one of the greatest wrestlers, greatest technicians. But like he intentionally would pull stuff back, and like he just
Mm-hmm.
knew, and it was like his mind was like it's like he was I don't even know like a fortune teller of pro wrestling.
And see, that's
He
so
just
smart
knew.
though, because like if
He
you're in a company of people who are doing all these moves and showing what amazing wrestlers they are, to pull back, like you just said, that's so smart. Like you wouldn't even think about
oh
that, but
he man he would come up with stuff that like a lot of his stuff got stolen too, man. He had this. Oh man, he one time I was wrestling him, and he was like, uh, "I'm gonna open your mouth and I'm gonna spit it." And I said, "Yeah, right." You know what I'm saying? You're not. I don't trade DNA with nobody. You feel me? And so, and he was like, "I'm not gonna do it, Caprice. He's just gonna look like it." You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
And we did the match, and at this time, Jimmy Rave was the heel because for most of our feud, I was the heel and he was the baby. And it's rare the Caprice Coleman heel thing, but I came in NWA Wildside as a heel, and so I was the heel or whatever. But this time I was the baby and he was the heel, and he does that move, and like the sound in the arena was like a gasp of like that was the grossest thing anybody's ever saw in a wrestling. Like it was just like they didn't know how to respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
It was like the greatest thing. He would come up with stuff like that. Like you know what I'm saying?
And was
He
he
knew
good at
where to
not getting
put
it
stuff.
in?
Say what?
Did he end up living up to his word too about not actually doing it? Like, did he?
Yeah, he didn't actually. Yeah, but no, he just made it look like he would make up the and he did all that stuff, and and I'm sure he's spit in some people's mouths. I don't know. I don't want to know. Yeah, I don't know. I just never crossed that bridge in pro wrestling. I don't trade DNA, baby. Uh, so, but yeah, he would come up with stuff like that, man. It's just his mind. He was a genius. He was a legit genius, and not just with him, not just with his stuff. Like he could see you and give you stuff that will make you better. He don't even have to be wrestling. He just knowing who you are, and he would have an idea for who you are and what would look good if you did this, and he would be right.
Wow.
Like that's what I'm saying. Like he would be probably the greatest producer in pro wrestling, if he was alive and healthy You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Um, and the problem with Jimmy, like people know, he was constantly fighting his demons.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that was his kryptonite. He never really got a handle on that. And then when he did, it was kind of too late. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
But bruh, like he was a genius, and he was a genius. He was a genius.
I can't imagine the car rides with him and Sal talking wrestling. You know what I mean? Because like Sal
Yeah,
told me, like they used to talk on the phone or hang out and talk about like Ray's feud with CM Punk that everybody loved from Ring of Honor. Like those two would just sit there, Sal and Rave, and they would just bat ideas around, throw ideas around, and
yeah.
probably responsible for a lot of the reason why. So obviously Punk was incredible too, but
Yeah, it's just stuff like that where Jimmy Rave always knew the role he was in. If he was the underdog, he would be the underdog. If he was the cheap heel, he would play it to the T and make you believe whatever he was doing. He would make you believe it, and that's just the way. That was his art. That was his art. That's what made him so good, is that he could morph into anything, and make you believe that's who he was. Kind of the only person I can even think is even close to that would have to be like Chris Jericho.
yeah,
But Chris Jericho never really changed everything. He just made subtle changes with his characters. You know what I'm
mm,
saying?
more nuance
Uh,
kind of deal.
yeah, nuances type thing. But he's still a genius. But like Jimmy Rave was the only one that could totally say he could he could he could have you crying for him one night and wanting to kill him the next in the ring.